If you could pick one guest to have the day after last night
That-
in the world,
She's
who
right
would you
here.
pick?
She's
Exactly.
right here.
So we're joined now at the that is totally true, Doris Kearns Goodwin, at the library desk by Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. Her latest book, The Leadership Journey: How 4 Kids Became President, which is more important for your kids to read now than ever. Author of bestsellers, An Unfinished Love Story, A Personal History of the 60s, and of course, Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. So last night, Trump declared victory in a speech in front of his supporters early this morning.
Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond.
Doris Kearns Goodwin joins us now. Doris, we are so thankful you made time for us. Thanks for being here.
So, Doris Kearns Goodwin, you just heard what the president-elect said. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond, talking about his greatest political movement of all time. Is he right?
I don't know that it's a movement. It certainly was a sweeping victory. There's no question. And that's what democracy is. Democracy gives you a chance to vote your leaders in and then vote them out. And I think what happened mostly was that Kamala Harris was not able to separate herself, as we've been saying, from Biden. Biden's support was 40%. People felt, large numbers felt we were on the wrong track. And the economy was really hurting a lot of people. I mean, all the optimistic messages, I thought they were the right messages, actually, at the time. So I looked at all the other presidential candidates, and only the ones with optimistic messages won in history. I mean, FDR amazingly was able to say, happy days are here again at the height of the Depression, and people felt good about the confidence and the optimism that he projected. JFK talked about high hopes, and Ronald Reagan always had an optimistic temperament. The "We Shall Overcome" was the anthem of the civil rights movement. It was "We shall believe, we shall overcome." And Obama was hope versus fear. And somehow, when Trump was talking in those last weeks about a sick society and an America in decline, it seemed against the idea that our economy, as everybody was saying, is better than any in the world. But people didn't feel that. The people who have been working class people, whether they're white or black or brown, they've experienced hard times. I mean, they have only a certain amount of money in their checking account. You know, one of the things LBJ said, listen to this. This is in 1964 when he wins big, obviously. He said, what the man in the street wants is not a big debate on fundamental issues. He wants a little medical care. He wants a rug on the floor. He wants a picture on the wall, a little music in the house, and a place to take Molly and the grandchildren when he retires. A lot of people don't feel that sense of security. They may be working 3 jobs. They have nothing to save. They can't take a person on vacation. They're deciding between whether they have enough money for prescriptions or for something else. And that was what was being felt. The economy they may have really poor timing. It may do very well soon, and wages are going up already, and inflation may go down, but people didn't feel it. And somehow, even as hard as I think she ran a very good campaign, given what she could do. And yet she was still tied to the past. And incumbencies are losing all over the world right now. It's hard to be a democracy when there's a populist movement which is based often on grievances, and you can't satisfy them, because it's hard. The globalization and technological stuff is screwing up people all over the world. People are being hurt.
So when you say, despite a good campaign and her best efforts, she couldn't disconnect herself, for lack of a better expression, from the Biden record that people didn't like, would that suggest that the color of her skin and her gender had very little to do with this outcome in your estimation?
No, I'm sure that had something to do with it as well. I'm sure there was racism. I'm sure there was sexism. But I think fundamentally, I think it was that ability, because the economy played a huge role. You look at what people were saying. And that's their daily life. You know, you can tell them, oh, it's going well, but they're not feeling it when they wake up in the morning. They're not feeling it when they go to bed worried at night. And this has been a long-standing problem. I think the Democrats have lost the working class people that was the base of their party for a long period of time. And what it has to do with free trade, it has to do with globalization. It's very hard to figure out what to do when the manufacturing base goes and people feel their community has gone away. And there's not a sense of social connection to the people that they had before. So it's a long-standing problem. But the time right now, what Democrats have to do is to pick themselves up and then figure out what went wrong, and things turn around. Look, after that great race in 1964, when LBJ won by a landslide, 2 years later, Ronald Reagan becomes governor of California, and the Republicans figured out how to argue what the role of government was, and then they win elections. Then they lose, and the next people come. We've got to take hope in the knowledge that these things come and go, and the most important thing is not to give up, to keep fighting and just move forward, and not say, oh my God, what are we going to do? We can do things. That's what happens. Democrats can do things, Republicans do things, and we move on.
Living up to your self-description with Anderson Cooper the night before the election, where Doris Kearns Goodwin says, I'm an optimist. It's in my genes, or whatever you said. So that's one example. For the 47% of people who are unhappy today and think we are edging towards disaster, give us some history, Doris Kearns Goodwin, about low moments where we did emerge and how we did.
I mean, just think about what happened with Abraham Lincoln. You know, in that lowest moment when the country was totally split in two in 1861, he takes office and he said, can you imagine? I couldn't think I could have lived through what was going to go through. A terrible price had to be paid with a civil war. 600,000 people died, but America emerged stronger than ever before because we had done with restoring the Union, and emancipation was secured. But most importantly, I think there's a real lesson in what Lincoln did at the end of that war for President Trump now. And there was no retribution that he wanted, no punishment. A lot of his radical friends wanted him to let the generals be persecuted, be hung, not even let the people who'd been in the Confederate things stay in government in any way. He said, no, it's a time for healing. He said both sides read the same Bible, both prayed to the same God, neither's prayers were fully answered in that great second inaugural. And then finally, with malice toward none and charity for all, let us bind up the nation's wounds. No nation was more split than that. We are split now, but that was even more, and we came through it, and we emerged stronger. We've got to remember that.
Did you read that book, Team of Rivals, by the way? It talks a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But wait,
hold on for a second. You just talked about malice toward none. Maybe he was just joking, but the former president, soon to be the next president, has malice toward many and talks about carrying out retribution against those many. So where does that leave us?
That will be a big mistake. And in the end, even though it may be that he has control of the government, in the end, public sentiment is what matters in this country. Citizens can make a difference. And if he goes in the direction of making real all those threats toward the generals, toward the firing squads, the country, I believe the citizens will not stand for that. And in the end, as Lincoln said, public sentiment is more important than anything else. With it, you can do anything. Without it, you can do nothing. In the early days, almost every change we've had in the society comes from the ground up. The anti-slavery movement was there before the Civil War, and that grew and grew and grew and finally produced the moral outrage towards slavery that ends slavery. The progressive movement was in the cities and states before Teddy Roosevelt took over. The civil rights movement was there for Lyndon Johnson. The women's movement, the gay rights movement is going to be up to the citizens right now, and I still trust the American people. I still trust the citizens. They will not allow those things to happen. They will fight, and that's the fight that has to be made. We're not sure they're going to happen yet, but if they do happen, we've got to trust that we can fight against those things.
But historically, Doris Kearns Goodwin, when people have chosen to rise up, which does not include tweeting, it includes doing something historically or whatever the equivalent of tweeting was, it seems to me as a non-historian that there was always a leader ready to capture that moment and lead. Of all the examples you've written about and are aware of where we have moved from what at least some consider the depths to finally see daylight again, has there not been somebody who captured the moment and helped lead that thing?
That's an excellent point, and I think that's right. In fact, sometimes I think the most echo for today's situation economically is the Industrial Revolution at the turn of the 20th century, and Teddy Roosevelt was there. What happened, like our time, the Industrial Revolution had shaken up the economy. People were seeing for the first time a gap between the rich and the poor. There was a feeling of inequality. People in this country didn't like the people in the city. Teddy Roosevelt warned that democracy would be in peril if people in different states, regions, and parties began viewing each other as the other, and that's what was happening. There was also a nostalgia for another way of life before all this changed, telephones and telegraphs, and that's the nostalgia I think people felt toward a pre-COVID time with Trump. When he said the economy was great before me, he's thinking about that year or so before COVID hit. And COVID was devastating all of us, and we haven't even figured it out yet. So people thought, that's what I want to go back to pre-COVID. People in the 20th century, as it was turning around, wanted to go back to an earlier farmer place. And then somehow Teddy Roosevelt fought for moving forward. And he was a fighting spirit. I'll fight those big companies. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to get workers compensation. I'm going to get minimum wage. I'm going to get maximum amount. And they felt we've got a guy on our side. Yes, somebody like that has to emerge. But who knows who will emerge right now? Who will be the leader of the Democratic Party? It's still to be determined.
We're talking to Doris Kearns Goodwin, needless to say.
One of the things I don't understand, though, when you look at what Americans say they want to get more affordable health care. They want some kind of reasonable gun control. They want to get more tax cuts for the middle class as opposed to the millionaires and billionaires and corporations that Trump mainly helped out last time. They're concerned about the climate. All these things are child care, help with child. These are all things that the Democrats want and that Republicans have stymied in Congress. So that's what I don't get, that disconnect, because Democrats may have botched this on many fronts, and she didn't separate herself from Biden, and the economy's bad for lots of people. But what makes people think that he's going to fix that? That's what the part I don't get.
Yes, somehow a group of people have felt he's on their side. I mean, that's what FDR said. The most important thing is an emotional connection, that someone's on your side. I think there's no question rationally exactly what you're saying is true, but somehow people haven't been made to feel by the Democrats that these are not just individual programs that they're willing, that they have an overarching philosophy about what government's role is. I don't know that they really made a narrative. Biden accomplished a lot of things, but he never changed people's feelings that government has a positive role to play and that it's not going to overreach, because people felt it was some overreaching. That's been the debate all along. What is the role of government? I mean, with LBJ, government was in there to really help people. Civil rights, voting rights, Medicare, aid to education, NPR, PBS, all of that stuff happened, and then there was a backlash. And then you have Reagan saying government's the problem, not the solution. Then you have Clinton coming along perfectly in the middle saying, it's both the solution and the problem, and I'm going to be a centrist. That's what we need, probably.
So, Doris Kearns Goodwin, here's an excellent, at least in my estimation, question for you from Paul from Braintree. It's a text, and it's picking up on your with malice toward none, with charity at all. President Biden should call Trump's bluff before the end of his term. He should pardon Trump. He should follow Lincoln's second inaugural address, what you said a second ago. Then, thanks to Biden, Trump will have come in with a clean slate. What do you think about that as a strategy?
Oh boy, I'd really have to think about that. One of the things that Lincoln said is, better to remain silent and appear a fool than to speak up and remove all doubt. So before I answer something like that, I will have to think.
Okay, fair enough.
Let me ask you something about the government overreach. Did part of that have to do with cultural stuff? And what's your take on that Democrats were too involved in culture wars?
I think that's part of people feeling anxious about the country moving in different directions now with social media, with the internet, with cultural changes, that people feel anxious about it. And it seemed like Democrats weren't aware of how that anxiety should be talked to.
Yeah.
Even if you want people to understand, these are okay things. You don't have to worry about them. I mean, gradually, when gay rights came about, there was public sentiment that came on the side. They understood that. These are people we love. Why should they not love who they love? These changes take time to absorb in, and you've got to be able to communicate them well enough.
Yeah.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, Brian Stelter from CNN, formerly the New York Times, writes the Reliable Sources column, which I think is terrific on the media. He has a piece this morning. Let me read to you from it. Charlotte Klein's recent New York Magazine column quoted an anonymous TV executive that's getting recirculated this morning. The executive said, and here's a quote, "If half the country has decided that Trump is qualified to be president, that means they're not reading any of this media." And he means fact-based legacy media, not Fox News. And we've lost this audience completely. A Trump victory means mainstream media is dead in its current form. And the question is, what does it look like after? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think one of the problems with mainstream media right now is what you mentioned earlier. If we're going to have a leader, leaders used to have the bully pulpit. Now millions of people have that bully pulpit with social media. When FDR would give a fireside chat, 8 out of 9 people would be listening on that radio. You could walk down the street on a hot Chicago night, Saul Bellow said, and you could look at the kitchen, look into the windows, and see them staring at their radio and hear his voice and keep walking and not miss a word because everybody was listening. You need that kind of capacity for a leader to communicate fact-based information that is not alternative narratives, and then people will absorb them. When you've got social media, you've got alternative narratives, you've got people arguing what are facts, it's much, much harder for the media to know where to go, and you've got divided media.
But we're not going to abolish social media, so how do we circumvent, how do we get around this problem?
I mean, these are the problems that a huge problem of what do we do about regulating it? What do we do about cell phones in schools? What do we do about keeping kids from spending so much time in isolation, which this is another problem of the generation right now. We don't have those same social places. De Tocqueville, good old Alexis de Tocqueville, remember him?
I do.
Well,
I do.
And I knew him, actually. He was a
talked
great
about
guy.
the informed electorate.
I knew him, actually.
And he talked about the fact that what made America's democracy work was that we all joined clubs. We were out there in organizations. We're not doing that anymore. That's that famous book, Bowling Alone.
Oh, by Bob Putnam,
Yes.
one
I
of the
love
greats
that. And
ever.
that was the greatest title for a book.
I
But it's
agree.
a scary thing right now. Where do we go other than social media to meet with other people, to even now commiserate the people who are hurt for what happened, should be with their friends talking about it and figuring out what do we do, how do we organize, how do we move forward. They can't just sit at home and feel sad. That right now it's the time for those people who feel that they've been hurt by this election to begin to figure out what do we do? What do we do?
But how do they manifest their dissatisfaction? I mean, their dissatisfaction was the dissatisfaction of a minority of the American people to the tune of, I think, roughly 5 million voters. How does one do that in 2024 other than by voting every couple of years?
Well, you can organize, you can start running for your for your school boards, you can start running in your local areas. I mean, maybe you know you're not going to have the national government, but I think more than ever we're going to need people to now believe in public service again. If we don't, if we leave the government to other people, then nobody who's going to be able to exercise their powers. Voting is the most important, but much more important even now is to just get active in your local area and begin to, if you feel like they're not doing what you want them to do, you start doing something, you make a promise, and you see it met, and then you feel, I've done something, I can go the next step. People can't shy away.
Do you worry, though, about it, during the, I don't have as much optimism as you have in your body, and I don't have as much confidence that will emerge.
You have to.
Well, I know you do, but I worry that during the time that we're ginning this up and getting to the point, a lot of really horrible things, at least to me, could happen in this country. And we don't know. I was just looking at CNN. The House is still unresolved, but as of the moment, it looks like there could be a Republican House, where, as I said before, the Supreme Court, the Senate, the House, the White House, all controlled by the same party. That could be a tough go while we're getting our act together.
No question. No, I mean, that one of the reasons why when Roosevelt did his first inaugural, he said only a foolish optimist would deny the brutal realities of the moment. Mm-hmm. But the only thing we have to fear is self. There's no question there's a lot of brutal realities of this moment, but that doesn't mean that you don't act and you don't move forward. If you lose confidence and you become disenchanted with the process, then all those things will happen.
Are you as positive as you say you are, or have you convinced yourself that I have to be to get through this life? I mean that sincerely.
Actually, I think it goes together. If you convince yourself that things can be better and that we can take action and that we can move forward as we have every other time in our history. We've had a lot of tough times in our history. Look, in those early days of World War II, Hitler was all through Western Europe. Yeah. It looked like we were never going to win that war, and yet the Allies won the war. We don't know as a people now how this is all going to end, but it's up to us to write the next chapter of that history. And I guess it's maybe true that I want to appear optimistic because then I tell myself I am, and then it's true, and then I act.
Okay. Well, I hate to be not optimistic for a second, but I've often thought, historians often call the last century the American century, right? And we've been running things for 150, 200 years, really, the big power all around the world. If this is Roman Empire ended, the Ottoman Empire ended, all these great empires ended. If ours is a short time compared to those, but that this is we've had it. That's what I fear is that the things. Our leadership in the world now, we know that Trump is not going to support Ukraine. He said, I don't think he's going to be very supportive of Gaza. So we're not going to be that great city on a hill, kind of light of the world kind of thing. I'm worried we could be over.
No, the foreign policy part is very worrisome. I mean, my daughter-in-law's from Ukraine, and her parents are here with us. He finally got to be here when he turned 60. You can leave Ukraine for a period of time. So they're living in my guest room. Oh, my goodness. I see them every day. So this is no way do I underestimate this problem. I think it's really scary.
And the peace of NATO all these years, too.
Absolutely. No, but then you have to just decide. I don't know how you influence that, but I think there's going to be people who are, even in that system of government we have. That's why containing the House may make a difference for Ukraine and for the Democrats.
I hate to be optimistic, but on this one issue that I care a lot about too, and I hope people do here, Ukraine, this is one of the few areas where some Republicans in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, who and I would call the reviled Mitch McConnell, at least in my book, has stood up pretty strongly. I know he's not going to be the next Senate leader of the Republicans, but this may be an area, despite the unanimity of the Vance-Trump position on this, that it may be Republicans who join with Democrats to actually support this fight for freedom.
I think that may well be true. And that's what happened, in the 1950s when you had politics stopped at the party's edge, right? At the water's edge. And you did have a lot of Republicans as well as Democrats coming together on that.
So we read at 4 o'clock today, Kamala Harris is going to speak at Howard University, her alma mater. In the meantime, I'm reading from NBC News, she's working on her speech. She's going to call Trump. How hard are those calls that, particularly when you have I don't know if it's, well, there have been campaigns like this, when they're this vitriolic and this intense, when you got to make that phone call, even if it's only for a few seconds, what's that like for these people?
I think all of our empathy has to go out to, just think about that. You wake up that morning and you think you may well be the next president of the United States, and it's gone. And it's, especially something like this was expected. And what's extraordinary about everybody except for Trump in 2020 was that they go with these gracious I've just got a few of them here. Just to think about that. When Stevenson lost, he quoted Lincoln. They go back to other things. When Lincoln lost his first race in 1858 in the Senate, he said, "I'm glad I made this great race. This is important. Even though I lost, it gave me a hearing on the great issues of the day I could not have had. And I think I made some marks which will tell for civil liberty long after I'm gone. I feel like the boy who stubbed his toe. It hurts too bad to laugh, but I'm too big to cry." And then what happens when Stevenson loses to Eisenhower? He quotes Lincoln, "I feel like the boy who had stubbed my toe. It hurts too bad to laugh, too big to cry." But then the important thing is, like Humphrey, when he loses to Nixon, he said, "I have lost, but be of good cheer. If I've helped to move our cause forward, I feel rewarded. We've got a president-elect, and he's going to have our help." Then McGovern, when he loses in 1972, and even though it was big, he didn't realize it would ever be that big. When he was 90, he was asked, "When did you get over the loss?" "Who said I ever got over it?" he said. "The loss is an old wound that never healed. I still feel the sting, though I'm glad I made the attempt. I wanted to win for my supporters and the soldiers I wanted to bring home," et cetera, et cetera. And then Carter loses to Reagan, and what graciousness he has. He said, "It's the most difficult speech of my life. I promised you 4 years ago I would never lie to you, so I have to tell you, it hurts. It really hurts. But the people have made their choice, and I accept their decision. I now ask for the full measure of your support for the president-elect as he undertakes the presidency of the greatest nation on the earth." And then Bush Sr., when he lost to Bill Clinton, he later said to a friend, he said, who was devastated at being fired, "I know how you feel. I was fired by the American people." And it hurt.
That's
and it
great.
hurt. But you'll be okay. And then Gore lost to Bush, and obviously he said partisan feeling must yield to patriotism, going back to Stephen Douglas. They go back in history, which is great. Neither anticipated this. The Supreme Court has chosen. I strongly disagree, but I accept my responsibility. We close ranks when the contest is done. We put country before party. Now, the important thing is that she will do that, and we know she's going to do that. The one thing we've avoided by Trump winning is that possibility that he would not have accepted this peaceful transition of power. And my real worry was that if he didn't accept it the second time, that there would be a stake really in the heart of democracy. This kind of gracious statement that I expect she will make shows that democracy is still strong. There's a moment for democracy.
Okay, so
but she's the first one who's going to have to apologize to somebody who said her vice president's called her trash. He's called her the C word. This is Trump called her the S word. Said she had a low IQ. All these horrible things about her. So she's really going to have to rise on the graciousness front, I suppose, to be gracious to him.
I think she will, because she's not being gracious to him for herself as a person.
Yeah.
She's being gracious to democracy, because democracy says when the loser loses, they accept that decision, and the transition of power goes forward. That is the most important thing. Old George Washington would be roaming around in his grave if he worried about that right now.
So you think we can still go on as a nation of laws with Donald Trump in the White House again?
We have to. Yes, we have to. And there will be, I know they say there aren't going to be any guardrails. The American citizens will be the guardrails. If they're not, and maybe, just maybe, this may sound really crazily optimistic. I mean, after the assassination attempt, that first one on Trump's life, he said, it's made an impact on me. I'm now going to change. I'm going to try and unify the country. He said it last night as well. He went right back to his temperament in those other times. But once you win, he's more sober when he wins. He was sober at that at the RNC. Mm-hmm. And maybe now the victory will make some of that anger fade away. I don't know, if he's possibly able to control it.
Has anyone ever met with you for more than 10 minutes where they didn't feel better after the conversation?
Well, history makes us feel better. It's not me.
You're incredible.
History gives us perspective. It gives us hope. It gives us solace. That's why I love it. That's why we've got to get it back in our high schools. We've got to get kids reading about
Read
time,
that book.
especially young kids. They don't know a time now where leaders were able to bring the country together. If they can read about FDR and they can read about Teddy Roosevelt, they can read about Abraham Lincoln, they'll feel better because they'll know we've been through really hard times before and we came through them.
You're the best. Doris Kearns Goodwin. Nobody like you. Thanks so much for your time.